As useful as it is to be using the console and the console.writeLine methods to see what's going on inside our application while it's running, there's really no good substitute for using a good debugger, which you can use to examine the code while it's actually running. And the debugger allows you to do things like place breakpoints in your code, examine the code, examine variables, change things while it's running, and so on. If you've done any kind of programming in other environments, like, say, JavaScript using either Firebug or the WebKit developer tools, or coding environments like C++ or Java, you might be familiar with using a debugger. If not, don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how to use the debugger that's contained here in the free version of Visual C# Express. I'm just going to use the existing example that we've already got from the section that we did on reading and writing file data. So I've got that example back open in my editor here. Take a quick look under the debug menu. You'll see that there are a couple of options related to debugging. There's the start debugging option, which is this option right here on F5. And that's actually how I've been running our examples each time we've tried them out. I just hit F5 and that starts the debugging process. You can also start an application without debugging by doing the Control F5. But if you want to actually have debugging information, you need to use the F5 version. There are also things like step into and step over and things like toggle breakpoint, and we're going to see how each one of these works. So let me close this menu. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to place a breakpoint. Here we have our main function, and the main function is going to be the entry point into our application from the .NET Framework. The .NET Framework is going to find this function and then call it to start our program up. So the first thing I'm going to do is find the first place where I can put a breakpoint. And it looks like this line right here, line 14, is where our program actually does something. So way over here in the left-hand side of the gutter next to the line numbers, I'm going to click. And you see that when I click, a couple things happen. First, this little red circle shows up. And that little red circle indicates that it is a breakpoint. And you'll notice that when I place that breakpoint, all the executable code that gets associated with that line, in this case it's lines 14 and 15 because I have one statement that's spanning multiple lines, gets outlined in red. And it indicates to me that that is a breakpoint. A breakpoint is a point in the program where when you're running the application, the debugger will stop execution right before it's about to execute that statement. So let's go ahead and start debugging the program. Open the debug menu. I'm going to choose Start Debugging, or you can just press F5. Now, when I do that, you saw the console window kind of momentarily come up there and then disappear behind the IDE. And now you can see there's this little yellow arrow inside that little breakpoint there, and it shows me where the current statement is. The breakpoint that was red is now outlined in yellow, and you can see that we've got a couple of other windows that have shown up. Down here in the bottom on the left-hand side, we have the Locals window. We also have something called the Watch window. The Locals window shows me all of the local variables that are currently within the current scope. So inside the main function, I can see all the local variables that I can currently have access to. Over here in the call stack, this shows me all of the functions that have been called leading up to this point. Now, right now, we're in the main function. I've only got two items on the call stack. I've got external code, which is the .NET Framework's execution engine. And then I've got the reading-writing-data.exe, reading-writing-data.program.main. So that's the function that I'm in. So reading-writing-data.exe, that's my program. Reading-writing-data is my namespace. Program is the class. That's this program right up here. Main is the function, and it says I'm on line 14. And sure enough, if I look over at the little yellow arrow, yes, I am on line 14. The other thing that happened is that this little debug toolbar showed up in my toolbars up here. And I've got buttons for continuing. So if I hit F5 right now, the program will just continue to run until it reaches the next breakpoint. Or I can stop debugging, which will stop the application. Or I can restart. I can have the program go back to the beginning. I can click on this little yellow arrow here to show me what the next statement is going to be, and that's where the yellow arrow right over here is. I've also got these three icons for step into, step over, and step out. And we'll take a look at what each one of these is. To step over this code, I can simply choose the step over function. That will cause the current statement, the one that's highlighted right here, to execute. And if you look down here in the locals window, you'll notice that the file path variable right now is null. There's no value assigned to it. Watch what happens when we step over that line. First, the little yellow arrow goes to line 18 because that's where the next line of executable code is. The second thing that happens is if you look down in the locals window, the file path variable now has this string in it, and it has a path to the example file.txt. And you notice also it's red. And the reason it's red is because the C# debugger is highlighting the local variable that changed. After I step again, it's going to stop being red because it's not going to change after that point. I can scroll down a little bit here. Now, if I wanted to, I actually could just simply change the value that's in this local variable. I can just double click on it and say, you know what, I don't want it to be called example file.txt. I want it to be called Joe's file.txt. I just changed the contents of that variable while the application is still running. So now this line of code right here is going to check to see if the file exists, and it does not. So when I step over that statement, we'll see that the brace gets highlighted. And I step again, and now we step into the if statement. So now we're going to create that file and set its contents. And once again, I can step over this, and you can see now that this content variable has changed. So I can also do things like hover over using the mouse. I can hover over things that are in the code. For example, if I hover over the environment new line statement right here, you'll see I get this little pop-up window that says what the new line's value is. And you can see that it's \r\n. Or I can hover over this local variable, and it shows me what the contents of that local variable is. I can also hover over things that are built into the .NET Framework. I can hover over the file class, for example. When I hover over the file class, it shows me that it's a type system.io.file, and I can click on this little expander here, and it shows me all the things that are inside that file class. Now, it's a built-in class, so it's not going to show me very much because it's in native code, but I can now just use my debugger to step through this code, and I can watch the application as it runs. You'll see that variables are changing. I can change the value of variables and so on. If I've gotten tired of just stepping through this, I can just go ahead and hit the little green arrow, which will cause the application to run. And we can see that the application is now running. And if I go ahead and hit the return button, the application will stop. The debugger stops, and I'm dumped back into my text editor. Let's make a slight modification to this application. What I'm going to do is make a function, and I'm going to make a function down here called static void read and list contents. And it's going to read and list all the contents of the file. So basically, I'm going to copy these lines of code right here, take them out of the main function, and put them into a function. And I'm doing this because I want to show you how the step into functionality works. Let's just get rid of that comment right there. I need to pass in the file path. And I also need to call that function. So we'll call read and list contents with the file path. And just to isolate this, we'll take out this code right here so that we only have one piece of code that's reading and listing the file contents. What I'm going to do is run the application again, and it's going to stop at this breakpoint right away. This time I'm going to start it using this little green arrow right here. You can see that the breakpoint got hit. What I'm going to do now is scroll down, and I'm going to place a breakpoint on this function call. So I just click there to place another breakpoint. And now I'm going to hit the little green arrow again, which is going to continue on to the next breakpoint. The application ran until it got to this breakpoint. Now I can use the step into function, and that's this icon right here. If I wanted to just simply execute this function without stepping into it, I could use the step over. That doesn't mean skip over the function. It means execute it, but don't go inside. Just do whatever the work it does, and then go on to the next statement at the level where I currently am. So if I stepped right now, the next statement would be this console.read line. But if I do a step in, I will actually step into that function. And now I can do step over, and step over again. And you can see now that the current line, as indicated with this little yellow arrow right here, is inside the read and list contents. I could just simply keep on stepping and stepping and stepping and going through these for each statements and so on, or I could use the step out function. If I click on step out, the execution is going to continue to the end of this function, and it's going to put me back into where the calling context was. If I click step out, now I'm back out here where read and list contents was called, but now the function is finished executing, and if I step again, I'll go on to the next statement, which is the console.readline. That's a pretty quick introduction to using the debugger. The nice thing about the debugger is that it allows you to slow down the program's execution so that you can see things as they're happening. And as you saw, we were able to place breakpoints and examine variables. We were able to change the contents of variables. We were able to step into and out of functions. The debugger really will become your best friend as you're writing your code because it makes debugging your applications so much easier.